So this blog post, I've been looking to write this one in a way for a while. And then I kind of just, when me and my buddy were talking, some concepts came up and I was like, wait a second, this is kind of along the lines of what I've been talking about, especially with Overwatch, but in game design in general, which is answers. And to me, and I think to the larger gaming community as a whole, answers is really bad. And I always give Diablo 2 as a really good example because Diablo 2 to Diablo 3, they went no answer route to only answer route. Diablo 2 had really funny builds. They weren't always the most effective, but you could beat hell difficulty with all of them. And I know it's PvE rather than PvP, so you can do some crazy shit. But the concept is still there that all gaming is basically based around being able to do what you want, how you want, and so that you have some agency and you have some creative outlet and you have all this other stuff. People aren't just like, here's answer A, and you're like, okay, thank you. I use answer A for everything. They're just like, here's an alphabet, fuck it, you figure it out. I'm out. That's what a game developer should do. That's what they did in Diablo 2, because like you have builds like Hammerden wasn't supposedly in existence. I was around when it was created, and I thought it was the stupidest thing ever, and then it was real. You had Singing Barbs. I mean, I had Assassin that only kicked, because you just maxed Dex, and you had a bunch of Dex stuff, and you just literally just fucking kicked everything. For those that don't know, most melee attacks were based on strength in the game, but for whatever reason, Assassin's special move, the kicks, were all Dex based, so you could do some stupid shit like that. And then look at Diablo 3, which is still PvE, and they go, oh, instead of having dedicated builds, like because in Diablo 2 you selected a build, you couldn't change it. You could change it like I think 3 times for the character's life, I forget. But they added that in pretty late. But Diablo 3 goes, okay, you can change your skills at any time. And therefore, if there's no consequence to choices, there's actually no choices. You have no choice. And they're like, oh, so if you fight boss A, you want to use this build. And if you fight boss B, use this build. And if you run into this issue, oh, you do this. Sounds a lot like Overwatch, right? Because there's answers. And then I was like, well, now you don't get to learn how to play, in that case, like Monk. Oh, I don't learn my one unique build with Monk, and I apply it to 40,000 different situations, and I have to understand the positives and negatives of each, and I have to come up with unique ways to solve each one, because my build's static. It came with the Willem build. Oh, I have to do this? Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll do that build. Okay. Oh, I run into this problem? Oh, thank you. I'll do that build. And it becomes essentially singular build. So you have essentially no builds, more or less. There's no creativeness. There's no player age. There's nothing. This is exactly on that type of idea. Because the original, and this is where we go over it, and the idea that I had originally had for this post was a discussion on the paradox of a solved game has no value, and all games will have a meta, or an answer. The reason why we don't like solved games is because you already know it. You've gotten the use out of it. If you ever want to know why solved games aren't fun, look at your Steam library. I'm probably on the low end, and I probably got like 50 games I'll never play again. Some people are in the hundreds to the thousands. It's crazy what happens when you solve a game and you get everything out of it. You're kind of done with it, and that's fine. Like that's the natural life cycle of a game. But there are games that we kind of want to play, and this is the whole thing. Like gaming is a service that we want to keep around for a very long time. Back in the day, we did expansion packs, but now we're doing DLC, and we're doing this battle pass shit, and people are trying to extend the games way longer than really I think that they're supposed to go for. The only reason a game really lasts a long time is essentially PvP. PvE stuff doesn't last forever. It can't. You can keep on adding content, but it just goes out. So anyways, this is what I was kind of looking at. I was like, solved game has no value. In my paper, I say, look at tic-tac-toe. And if you can look at tic-tac-toe, and it is the most hated game or most hated board game out there, Because as soon as you have like any intelligence and you can look forward a little bit, you can always end in a draw. There's just no way like about it. You can always end the game in a draw, and because of that, it just doesn't really have any value. No one really finds it fun, and you're just like, yeah, okay, cool, whatever, and you move on to the next thing. And everyone will agree that there's metas. So I was like, well, what the fuck? These two things contradict each other quite heavily. What's going on? So that's kind of what I wrote about. So, rabbit hole, you can describe, understand the Cormac game longevity. We're going to follow the path I took. I kind of described that about the paradox. So with any type of question and answer and understanding things, there's going to be things we have to agree on. Like there are just things we have to accept as truth just to have an argument. If we don't have any truth, you can't have an argument. You can't have any discussion. You can't have anything because it's like purely subjective. Everyone's just kind of saying random shit. So the first things that I really want to focus on, so I say, we'll have to agree on a couple things. The first is that a solved game has little replayability and low value as a game. Now, the difficult part here is, this is actually incredibly difficult, is just the definition of a game. I actually kind of avoid the topic just because it's its own fucking paper, probably. We just kind of have to understand, like, enjoyment, getting fun, getting something out of the game. But as the game itself, not, like, outside of it. Like, with tic-tac-toe, like I say, you can teach kids basic concepts, but, like, outside that, it's not worth much. I'm not saying you can't get any value out of a game that's been solved, but there's lower value. And I think this is pretty reasonable for us to agree on that. Yeah, solved game kind of loses value. Again, look at your Steam library, right? You agree with me. The second idea is that there will always be a best way to play a game. While not a singular best, there may be multiple set of strategies and techniques that are considered the best compared to everything else that's available. The idea is not everything has value, because if everything has value, then nothing does. This reminds me of work when everything is escalated and everything needs to get done now, then nothing needs to get done now, right? Like, it's just like, oh, and that's operating as normal. Everything's on fire, therefore nothing's on fire. We have to agree that there will become a best way to play the game, and it will eventually get found. And just to know what we need to agree on is that all I'm saying is there needs to be a subset of things that are better than other things. Right? In Diablo 2, for example, since we're on that, there could be some weird healing aura build with Paladin, but like 95% of the time it doesn't work, do anything, or requires like hyper specialization to only work that fraction of a percent of the time. Yeah. And then the last idea we need to agree on is that stopping a game from being solved will extend the longevity of the game. To be clear, this is not inherently negative or positive. So I don't want to be like, extending the game's always good. We should make games last forever. No. I don't think that's good or bad. I think games have their natural life cycle, and whatever that life cycle is, hey, that's what it is. Cool. I don't want to put any words in people's mouths about this type of stuff. But the idea is that the longer it goes unsolved, the longer it will be played. And so these three things, I think, are fairly reasonable. I think most people would agree to them, at least in some basic concept. And that's kind of what I'm going for. I'm not going for, like, I know there's probably going to be some super hyper answers to these, and they're like, oh, in this case it's not true, therefore everything you say isn't true. Web page, Bang Blog, please. That's where it will be at. So I just throw it up there, and I'm like, if you agree to these things, then that's a contradiction. Then why won't you say your game is shit? Right? Because we can use Overwatch as a very good example. Overwatch, for a lot of its life, has a meta, and the game gets solved. And we see viewership and Overwatch League viewership and the player base just fucking plummet. Right? So there's something to it. But if we tell these people, like me, you're like, hey, Overwatch has been solved, the game sucks. And I'd be like, yeah, that is the biggest problem about it. I mean, I'm still going to play it. I'm still going to get some enjoyment out of it because I don't play for the meta. I don't play that way. But if I did, yeah, the game would fucking suck. If I had to just, it would feel like a job if I had to load up and do exactly what the game told me to do. So why doesn't everyone do this? Well, each game attempts to stop being solved in its own way. And so I was like, well, let's look at the ways that we can stop a game from being solved. Mechanic number 1, adding content. A la DLC. Everyone's favorite fucking thing these days. In the beginning, it was called expansion packs, and games were typically added, and in these expansion packs, this is why I call Overwatch 2 an expansion pack. Games typically added a couple more units, a couple more maps, and maybe some campaign missions. Not to mention, back in the day, we didn't have bug or patches or fixes like that. We actually had to wait for expansion packs to get real big fixes, or like an unofficial fix, or an external site you had to go to download it. In modern times, DLC is constantly added to artificially keep games alive, as it does nothing to solve the original problem of the game being solvable, right? This is what adding heroes and maps does to games. It's not like, oh, we have infinite more content. You added one new hero. Woo, look how much else. It's like, no, you added a hero. You added a couple new maps. I have solved those maps. We're in the exact same problem we were at first. Where everything's been solved and I don't get any value from it. And I go on to say, that's what I just said. While I sound overly negative about this solution, I want to stress that not every game is meant to last forever. It's completely reasonable to play a game for X hours of content and be done. It's perfectly legitimate to add DLC for $5 down the road to give customers the same feeling they felt when they originally had. So, I'm like, look, I'm not saying it's negative that DLC exists and it artificially inflates the game, because sometimes that's all you want. Like, I'll just say Final Fantasy X. Like, people play an RPG, especially JRPGs, and they're just like, well, that is like the maximum gameness I can get from the game is my first time through, because I know the story, I know all these mechanics, I know pretty much everything about the game. And JRPGs specifically, just not to nitpick, but they usually use story and all this other stuff and art and music to kind of get you to look away from really shitty game mechanics. Like, even as a traditional JRPG player, fuck me, like, those games, the mechanics, like, if you took out most of, like, art, music, story, the fucking gameplay sucks. Like, all traditional JRPG, it gets boring after you played it for the 60th hour. There's a reason why modern RPGs really, like, try their best to get away from this stuff. But don't want to get too far on a tangent. So artificial add content, people solve it, bam, same problem. But yeah. I will say this, and this is like my only time. I guess I tried to keep this paper really Overwatch unspecific. Obviously, we're an Overwatch stream now, so I'm referencing Overwatch a lot. But I'm like, this is the core reason why I'm not a fan of a pick ban system. It doesn't increase the shelf life of a game. Well, it does. Sorry, it adds more content essentially, and then you reach that content. Right, you're just adding some more problems, and the problems get solved, and then you're kind of back at square one. The pick ban system, separate from this paper, what the pick ban system does in any game is allow for player agency and for the player to solve problems that the developer cannot address right away, or to tell the developer what problems exist in the game. If there were pick bans in Overwatch and everyone banned the strongest hero, you would never see Ana played or all the other strong heroes, right? And then the developers would have to go, Ana never gets played, we really would like her to get played, let's nerf her and balance her so that, she's doesn't get banned and, she can be picked again. Essentially, Ideally, pick ban system would be done until the game's perfectly balanced, and then it would be removed because it should just be a tool to fix things. That's not how it works. The game will never be perfectly solved, all that type of stuff. So the pick ban systems are usually around all the time. So this is our first way, adding content. This is how we extend the shelf life of something. Again, it's not a permanent solution, but it does its job. Method number 2, execution. And what I mean by this, skill. Next is the most common way of extending the life of the game is by basing it in execution or skill. We see this in fighting games, MOBAs, and battle royales where the only game mode is PvP. Right? Humans, as soon as you pit one person against another, mind games get thrown in, and that creates so much more content than an expansion pack ever. The game has an artificial ceiling because the only way to play it against each other is against other players and testing your skill against theirs. Humans will never be able to play a game perfectly, so no matter how high the skill level gets, mistakes can happen, which will keep things interesting. So this is funny because if you base a game purely on execution, people fuck up. When I fight, and I've been at a couple tournaments, it's about who makes fewer mistakes. It has nothing to do with who's better. That's how fighting goes. A little bit of luck goes a long way because whoever fucks up less wins. And everyone's capable of fucking up. So you're just trying your best not to really fuck up that much. So this inherently kind of makes the game unsolvable in a way. Like conceptually, just because humans, the tools they use may have been solved, but when going against players, very difficult to solve exactly. On top of that, humans can adapt their style to current trends and metas to take advantage of natural weaknesses that other games will never be able to emulate. So, like we talked about Diablo 2, there's no way for Diablo 2 monsters to be as smart as people, and therefore it will never be able to adapt in a way constantly that's unsolvable. That's all this line means. The main disadvantage of execution is that you cannot use it alone. It is very rare for games to stay popular for decades when it's only rooted in execution. Even games that have no support from developers have only lasted because of the community creating mods. For those who don't know, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, game made in the fucking 90s. Content, boom. They released an expansion pack, 2 expansion packs, boom. By the time 2000 hit, it had no more content, it was solved. If it wasn't for modders, game wouldn't have made it really popular through the 2000s. And to what it is today, where sometimes Heroes of Might and Magic 3 has like 15, 20,000 viewers on Twitch, and it's outclassing Overwatch. Or maps like StarCraft Brood War. Brood War is the diamond in the rough. It is bottled lightning. They did no balance changes, and the game worked out. How did it work out that way? Maps. They balanced the game around maps. So, you need something with execution to make the game last long. You can't just use execution because then at a certain point people stop giving a fuck about it. Or they don't, and you're left with this, which the next paragraph talks about. Very few people that are extremely strong, and no one will ever get into it ever again. Outside of ancient games such as chess or Go, the only games in the genre that I've seen stick around with absolutely no content is speedrunning, which is just PvP time trials, right? Speedrunning, technically, this would go into the community like modding or something, but technically no one's adding extra content. There's no new mods, there's new maps, there's no new nothing. It's just people trying to get better at the game. In that context, speedrunning's incredibly unique. Because it's going. It's still going now. People keep running Mega Man 2, and that shit hasn't changed since the fucking cartridge. In fact, they use a cartridge, like the first cartridge, like the 1.0 cartridge. Specifically because there's no changes in it. Another disadvantage is how to onboard new players after the game has existed for a while. This topic here is its own topic. We could discuss this for a long fucking time, but I'm keeping it short and sweet. Once a game loses some of its shine and the player base starts to lower, which is unavoidable, by the way, don't expect players to go like this the whole time. It always goes, and then it goes like waves. then the players stick around and become more skilled. If it goes on long enough, you have an unclimbable wall for new players trying to get into the scene that only the grittiest of players will be able to climb. This is one of the reasons why Team Fortress 2 has massive casual mechanics like criticals. You can see here, Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic the Gathering, talks about the conversation he had with a Team Fortress 2 developer and how they used luck to onboard new players into the genre, FPS, that had a notorious skill gap between new and veteran players. With criticals, a new player has some way of competing against a higher skilled opponent every now and then. They may still lose, but they still had fun and engaging moments in the game where they frag the opponent. So, this is, a major disadvantage since we're talking about longevity of games. This has to be brought up. As soon as you base something on execution and people get really good at it, it's really difficult to get people into it. This is why I was top 500 season 1 and 2, and I could dunk on people in Overwatch. Simply FPS mechanics. Now, if you can imagine if Overwatch didn't have answers, and I just kept on dunking people with my higher execution. I'm plateauing, so my rate of growth is not nearly as fast as a new player. But eventually we would get to there. But this whole time the player's getting destroyed, and that's really demoralizing, and a lot of people will quit during that time. But eventually they can catch up, just because the rate of growth... Guys, rate of growth in life doesn't constantly go like this. It doesn't. It's usually quicker at first, and then it slows real down. Sometimes it's a plateau. There's a lot of things you gotta deal with in life. Mechanic number 3. On my stream, I've called this deception. So here, I've called it uncertainty, just because I think that's a nicer name for it. The next way developers can keep a game fresh is through mechanics that deny perfect information and create uncertainty. The goal is to force the player to adapt quickly to different variables. Roguelikes add randomness to keep the game from getting too static, while in PvP games there are mechanics like Fog of War that hide information. By adding uncertainty, players have to take time to scout or have a plan for their strategy to work against multiple unknown variables. This allows players a certain degree of agency to pick and customize their build, to then master it in the long run by understanding how their unique ideas go up against all other hidden variables. This is what I talked about with Diablo 2. This is what I talk about mastery in Overwatch as well. Overwatch's core fundamentals of swapping, if you believe in it, then you believe in when the going gets tough, give up. Because that is what Overwatch teaches people. Oh, you can't do this with Junkrat? Well, then give up. Just go another hero. Don't get good at Junkrat. No, that's stupid. Don't ever get good at a hero. Pick the easier answer. Which, if we look at every other competitive thing ever, that's not the case. They're never like, oh, that pitcher's throwing a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Oh, guess you gotta pick a new swing. No, people come up there with some goofy ass swings. I can't remember, but the Detroit Tigers had a player, and he had a really weird swing. And in high school, they said you would never make it into the MLB with a goofy ass swing like you do. And he made it to the MLB and hit a lot of fucking home runs. So even something like that, like swinging a stick, there's only so many ways you can swing a stick, but people still find their own way to do it. And because they master it, they find success. I find it stupid to punish people for mastery, which Overwatch does. And I will just say this about Overwatch. If you're like, but that's the game, picking different answers, picking the right one, I'll say fuck off and take a multiple choice test. I don't want you dictating how the game I want to play is turned into multiple choice. It should be about execution and not decisions, which we'll get into later. These hidden variables is what has allowed StarCraft Brood War to create esports. It did. Anyone says otherwise, they're fucking lying. StarCraft Brood War in South Korea is what created esports for the world. It's still going to today. The ASL is going on right now. Tasteless and Artosis are casting it. They're great games. You can look it on Africa TV, AFREECA TV on YouTube. If you haven't seen any of them, fucking A, guys, you got like 23, 24 years of StarCraft content to catch up. And it is the most exciting, to me, not exciting to everyone, most exciting stuff out there. So what happens is humans are amazing at abusing deception and incomplete information. It's this that causes the standard strategies to be understood over time, which in turn makes them incredibly predictable and open to very specific counter tactics. This causes a natural cycle of strategy and tactics with no developer intervention. It is by far the best tool to add longevity, because it essentially puts it at the sky. You can always keep this game new and fresh as long as you have maps and some changes with to that side of things. Remember, you can't kind of do it alone. But what uncertainty does is, I don't know what you're doing, you don't know what I'm doing. All right, I'm going for a very greedy build. I'm just building units that make me more money. Oh, you picked like a really fast rush and now you're attacking me right away. I lose. All right, so I'll play a little more defensive. I'll get some units, but I won't be that greedy. You went pure greed. Now you have an economic advantage. Shit. And this is what happens. Like, it's not. This won't make you win or lose, but it does give you an edge, and there's solutions to each one. And because there's this natural cycle of essentially greed and risk taking, and essentially the opposite of just not taking any risk, there's always something the opponent can do to take advantage of your decision. And in turn, you can always do something to take advantage of their decision. Because you don't know exactly what they're doing, you kind of create this interesting concept. It's very abstract. It's beautiful what the game becomes. As long as the answers aren't too hard. Like, there will always be a build order win. We're talking about StarCraft. If you open up just very greedy workers and just command centers, that type of stuff, and they just build attacking units, yeah, you just lose. But actually, the good players, they can fight back, and sometimes they can beat that with a greedier build. So it's really awesome what incomplete information does. Overwatch, we'll get this at the end, but Overwatch does not do this. The major downside to denying perfect information is that if builds, strategies, and tactics vary too much, they can be seen as too random. In StarCraft 2, the Protoss race is designed in a very interesting way, where the early game is set in stone, but once they get to their first tech building, they can diverge into 3 completely different technology paths. Each one requires the opponent to answer in a different way, and while this is fairly balanced against Zerg and Terran, when against another Protoss, it felt very gimmicky. It was so gimmicky, the best Protosses in the world would sometimes lose to players much less skilled than they were because they were since they picked the wrong answer, to a problem they couldn't see. While Blizzard has attempted to fix this issue with defensive buildings and units to scout early on, the nature of imperfect information means this still happens every now and then, but a little bit less. Basically, imagine, I'm going to kind of say it here, but there's one path in Protoss up until Cybernetics Core, and then from there they go 3 different tech paths that are night and day different. And if you pick the answer to one, you lose to the other 2. They've obviously balanced this, but at first it was very random. It was so random, it just wasn't fun. It was too much randomness. Right? You still want a degree of execution to overcome this, and whenever you ever go too far, well, that gets dangerous. It just becomes unfun because then you're just flipping a coin. You're like, all right, well, did I win or did I lose? It's nothing I could control. So that really loses player engagement and definitely kills longevity of gaming. Mechanic number 4, overwhelming tasks. This is unique. Most of you people probably don't know this one. While we're talking about StarCraft, I'll cover the next way to extend longevity of game that I've only ever seen in StarCraft Brood War. I have never seen this in any other game ever. Give the player such an overwhelming amount of tasks that they humanly cannot do them. It's incredibly unique because it's a mixture of limited programming of the late 90s, design decisions when there was no basis for video game design, and simple laziness. StarCraft has little to no automation. You can't even make workers mine automatically after they're built without telling them to do it every single time. The movement is programmed so oddly that you can micromanage a unit so well that players will be unable to kill it without the proper answer. The more time you spend controlling the unit, the more worth you can get out of it. Simply moving a unit looks completely different from a pro to a casual. The problem is if you do that, then you won't be able to build workers, or telling them to mine, or building units, or anything else. This is such a unique thing that it's never been done before because it makes gaming feel like work. StarCraft, if you make a worker, it just pops out. Even if you put the rally point on minerals, it'll just go to the mineral and sit there. You actually have to select every single barracks, every single unit producing a building, and individually queue a unit up to make. It's essentially zero quality of life, and that's why no game does it nowadays. Because the shit you have to do in that game, you're just like, why the fuck doesn't it do this automatically? Like, this is stupid. I shouldn't be wasting my time moving a worker every 30 seconds. And if I got 5 buildings that make workers, you're doing that 5 times every 30 seconds. The thing is,
my genius is finally recognized.
The thing is that because it's not just this like tactics and strategy that players are picking what to do, they also have to pick what they literally can and cannot do. So some players choose the micro. So they take one unit and they use them really, really well. And in this game, it's one of the only games this is ever possible. But the more you micro this unit, the more value you get out of it. Seemingly unlimited value you can get from it. And the funny thing is that almost every unit in StarCraft Brood War is broken when used properly. Because the Vulture, it's just a quick little moving unit. And it has to stop and it has to shoot. Unless you know Patrol Micro. In which case, they will shoot and they will go back instantly. They basically do an animation cancel. So you can just sit there at the edge of people's ranges and just go boom, 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 boom. And while they just like try to attack move you, their units will go up, shoot. Chase you, shoot. While their units are just fucking flying around, shooting all the time. And like, well, you're getting more use out of your units microing, but that guy's back at his base and he made 50 more units. So eventually micro will lose the macro. Unless they're really good. Like, it's very dynamic. It's very interesting. So much of the game is manual that you have to pick what you want to focus on, and what gives professional players so much character in their play. Is it busy work? Yes. Is it tedious? Extremely. Yet, this causes the game to have depth where no other RTS has, to this day, depth. The degree of player agency and customization is insane with this type of system, but the drawback is immense. This is like playing a game that's half work and half fun with no quality of life changes. I think StarCraft is beautiful, but I doubt any game would ever take this approach, but it's very good to learn. I don't expect this ever to happen again. But it's good to know, and it's good to see, what's the side effects of these types of things. So the last mechanic. Overwhelming choice. So let's keep the thing with overwhelming information and move to the oldest game mechanic that has seen some recent resurgence. Overwhelming options. 2 ancient games use this mechanic. Go and chess. I'm sure those games weren't designed knowing it would be still be popular 1,000 of years later, but it's this concept that allows these games to keep evolving and studied for what seems to be like forever. What's amazing is that in chess and Go, you have perfect information. So if a solution is known, then it can always be seen and applied. Yet because there are so many solutions, humans are unable to play it perfectly. Computers are getting closer and closer to that point of the game being solved, which brings the question, at what point will humans lose interest in chess as it becomes more about memorization than problem solving and forward thinking? Will the imperfect humans keep playing, or will they study with computers and the game will lose value because it becomes more solved? This video is getting put out at a very specific time because I guess there was some big-ass controversy in the chess community. Apparently, some guy might have cheated. And my fucking barbarian brain, I was like, well, how'd the guy cheat? And they're like, oh, well, he was looking up answers with a computer. And I was like, so? Like, clearly execution, again, my barbarian brain, like my FPS brain's like, well, you still gotta click ahead. Like, I can tell you how to click ahead, but you still gotta do it. You still gotta perform it. Chess isn't that way, right? It's all decision making. There's no execution. So I was like, yeah, so what? Like, you have perfect information. Therefore, if an answer is that easily obtained just by through a computer, then fuck, like that's your own game's fault. And I understand people are like, yeah, that's the whole challenge of that, the person, it's difficult for the person to do it. I understand that argument. But again, I'm just like, well, execution. Like, you could tell me the perfect way to fight. You could tell me the perfect way to play Overwatch. You could tell me the perfect way to play anything. And since it has execution, I can't do it. There's no way I can go up against someone skilled in that. Which, again, people are like, chess can't be solved. Raccoona in chat, he's not in chat, but he's in our community. He's in the chess, and he's like, yeah, at the top levels, actually, a lot of people are finding it boring because a lot of solutions or problems have found answers, and you just do the answers and you either draw it out or you win. Like, it's more about memorization than forward thinking and all those other things that, like, chess and Go are known for. Go, even more so, it has, like, I'm sure it's some exponential bullshit that, like, a billion times more, situations than chess. But either way, the idea is there are so many choices that the player can't, it's that lemon meme. They're just holding all the lemons. They're like, what do I do with all these choices? And they have to pick ones, and sometimes they're wrong, and that's what makes the game cool. But when we're talking about the solvability of games, overwhelming choice just puts it way up here. As time goes on, we start meeting that. Technically speaking, Go and chess will be solved. Will it be like during the heat death of the universe? Fuck if I know. But there is a cap. And we, right now, in our intelligence, we may not be able to understand that cap. But with quantum computing, I'm pretty sure, man, give this shit like 50 to 100 more years and we'll solve it. We'll have to come up with some crazy-ass new game. But yeah, there technically is an answer to these games. While people don't like saying that, there is. You can introduce more rules. You can introduce different things. Like, you could do different point systems. The rules of chess may have to evolve, and the rules of Go may have to evolve as things go on in the future. Way beyond any of us that are watching this video or listening to me, past our lives. Yeah. So I was like, in either case, we can see the advantages and disadvantages of this style, but looking at a very recent game, Tekken 7. While odd to compare chess to Tekken, the results are quite interesting, and I get it. Tekken, fighting game, heavy execution. Chess, for nerds, right? Tekken's for cool people. Chess, big old nerds using that game. Tekken is a fighting game, an entire genre that's incredible. It's so execution based, right? A fighting game is almost 90%. I mean, I say that it's less than that, but it's like 75% execution based. To combat the issue with a pure execution based game, they did something unique. They gave each character a ridiculous amount of moves. The lowest I can find is 64 moves, while the most is 180. To compare, the average move count for a character in Street Fighter is around 25. So we're talking triple to 8 to 10 times, well, not 10, but 8 times the amount of moves. This is a profound effect on the game. Players can't memorize all the offensive and defensive options until the professional level. Not because it's any type of skill, just because there's so much. Like, you really have to dedicate yourself and get very good at this game to understand all the answers. With players unable to memorize and recognize every move, defense is a bit too unreliable, which makes the game aggressive. This is important at lower ranks because the game can seem action-packed and incentivize offensive risk-taking. It's a mechanic designed to create unprecedented upsets until players invest a lot of time to recognize each character's attacks. Basically, if I go to punch you, it could be high, low, and in Tekken, like, they got, like, I believe moves that go around. So, if you're playing a character that I kind of know, but, like, you're using move 157, and I don't fucking know what that looks like, I don't know what the warm-up is, like, because they have tricky moves. Like, the character will spin around and maybe attack high or maybe attack low. What the fuck? Well, how do I block that? Right? I gotta do something. Either I know it or I take a guess. So, this causes people to be like, well, fuck, if you don't know what my character can do, then I'll just be aggressive. Because I don't know your character. I can't memorize every character. I'd rather get a hit in so I can get more hits in and win the fight. It's a very old take into a modern genre, and they're basically leveraging both sides of it. Like, it's actually a really cool answer. I don't really like fighting games. I'll watch them. One of the game developers I talked to, he's big into fighting games. So this is where he came. Like, he was talking to me about this, and we go on and on about stuff. And I'm just like, all right, this is a very unique way to add longevity. Because if people want to put in the time, they can. And they can get very good, and they can really deal with everything. If people just want to put in a little bit of time and have fun, then yeah, just fucking button mash and have fun. Start fighting, and it's offensive, and it's big risk, big reward, and that's really fun for new players and even like mid-entry players. But as you go on, it slowly becomes less and less effective. But as people get more educated in offense, as they do in defense, even at the mid-levels, you still got a fighting chance against someone like a high mid versus a low mid-tier player. Like, that's great. Like, we addressed the issue with execution-based stuff, right? In the previous example, like, I was like, this is the downside of execution-based games. Well, fuck, this solves it. Sort of. Again, it makes an answer, but it's pretty far out there. Just like chess and like Go. People have to invest a lot of time. A lot less than chess or Go, but still a lot less time than other games. Or sorry, a lot more time than other games. This results in a game that's easy to pick up and gives the player great gratification by doing cool moves and taking big risks, even allowing you to randomly beat high-level opponents at times. Again, it's not constant, but at times. At higher levels, it makes the game very difficult to master, but quite rewarding, as you should have a significant advantage once you learn all the characters and all the movesets. It's heavily visual reinforcement when you block all of the opponent's attacks, when years back you couldn't. Types of reinforcement of growth is really important in gaming. I talked about Heroes of Might and Magic 3 before. The town, as you build more and more buildings and structures and get more units, like the town map fills up and it looks different. If you looked at a new town compared to a town that's fully built up, night and day, and like for players, that's whenever you have something visual that shows progress, it's such a good reinforcement. And the difference between someone getting their ass kicked and then when they're better, they're blocking everything. Again, that's very visual. It makes people really love getting good at something. Of course, this has a theoretical limit, as everyone could learn all the movesets, but it's highly unlikely. It's incredibly funny to me because such a brutish way to reach the golden solution of easy to pick up, hard to master, something all developers hope to achieve. You will hear easy to pick up, hard to master for everything. They're like, this is why chess is beautiful, this is why Go is beautiful. And they're like, I believe when Jeff Goodman said it for Overwatch, he's like, we want a game that's, easy to pick up but hard to master. Like, that's what everyone's goal is, and that's true. This is such a brute force. Like, this is some ogre coming in and being like, I can solve this problem. Hit it with a fucking big stick. Because all they do is like, yeah, we can solve this execution issue and all this easy to pick up, hard to master. Yeah, just give everyone 1,000 moves. Sweet. It's hilarious. Also, about higher level or lower level players beating higher level, because you don't take it out completely and it just happens from time to time. Usually what happens is higher level players will forget that they lost to a lower level player every now and then. They're just like, hey man, that's the game, that sucks, but I'll get better. While lower level players will remember that forever. They'll be like, oh my god, remember that guy was like 1,000 ranks higher than me and I whooped his ass? And all I was doing was just hitting buttons. So it creates incentive for veteran players to get better, and it gives more memorable moments for lower level players that basically just play it for a memorable moment and they're done playing the game. So it's very good on all fronts. So now what? We've talked about the mechanics that I've really looked into on keeping a game, increasing longevity. I don't know if there are other mechanics to keep a game going on for longer periods of time. I'm sure there are. I'm not perfect. I looked at a lot of stuff, but I didn't look at everything. But what can we do with this information? Like, cool, you talked about it. The fuck, what now? While it's interesting to list these out to see if a game extends its life in a solvable way or natural way, I like to take it a step further and group these up so that we can get more insight. So, all we did right now is just say, hey, how do we know when there's a low cap and we can solve it and the game gets little use, and then when it has a high cap, we can get more out of it? We looked at Overwatch. Like, if we look at Overwatch, very low, bam, gets solved, people stop playing the game. We have a lot of evidence of that. Viewer counts of 4,000 kind of prove that people just don't give two fucks about a solved game. This is only my initial thought, so it's far from perfect, but I like to group these up as PvP or PvE mechanics. And the reason I did this is because me and my buddy were talking about PvE versus PvP mechanics. And I was like, oh, let me take the longevity thing and apply it to this concept. If it falls into one bucket, I believe its opposite would fall into another. So if extra content is a PvE concept, then PvP concept is no extra content working on the fundamentals, which we've just already talked about is true. For example, extra content is heavily, I say it right here, extra content is heavily PvE mechanic. Adding a few maps and heroes extends the PvE life out, but then this is done, which is perfectly fine for PvE. You're not expecting to play those forever. While in PvP, the longevity doesn't come from extra content. It comes from core design mechanics that are heavily replayable because of human partners. We can do this with all the topics I covered. And I leave overwhelming tasks out because that's strictly Brood War. So we have extra content, that's PvP. Execution-based stuff is PvP, which means decision-based stuff would be PvE, right? Its opposite goes into the bucket. Uncertainty is PvP, fog of war, right? Keeps things unique. This means perfect information is more of a PvE mechanic. Overwhelming choice, PvP, because there's no way to make, I was thinking overwhelming task. Overwhelming choice is a PvP because you just have to dig into it so goddamn much to actually understand. So, fewer choices, simple amount of choices, let's say, is PvE. It seems odd that most ideas for longevity is rooted in PvP gameplay, but when you look at the history of gaming and see what has stuck around for the longest, it's true. PvP and competition-based games stick around for decades while PvE does not. Not only that, but if we take the opposites, we see what drives PvE gameplay, such as perfect information, simple or thin design, and putting decision-making over execution. Those of you that have... I'll talk about it later. Sorry. It also shows that modern game designers like to keep PvE and PvE mechanics separate. The separation is so extreme that PvE games that use PvP mechanics are extremely popular and well-known, such as Dark Souls, or high-base skill platforms like Hollow Knight and Celeste. So the idea is we usually try to keep PvE stuff in PvE and PvP and PvP. Like, oh, it's a very difficult game, yeah, that's PvP. But all of a sudden to get a PvE game that's incredibly difficult, it's fucking super popular. Dark Souls, right? Like, what is it? They did the Prepare to Die edition. Like, they fucking know it's hard. A lot of the platformers like Celeste, Hollow Knight, Super Meat Boy, Darkest Dungeon is one of them. A lot of these games that are really popular for being difficult are PvE games that use PvP mechanics. So whenever you mesh these, you get a good game, usually. We can use Overwatch in this. And this is where, let me get you how this reads Overwatch at the end. To take this theory one step further, the golden idea of easy to pick up and hard to master coincidentally lines up with our concept. PvE mechanics will open the door to players and allow them a fun way to learn, while PvP mechanics will be there to ensure depth and longevity to the game. Well, not an exact science, if I was making a new game, I would line up my core mechanics and see how they set into PvE or PvP mechanics, and to see where the game is going in the short and long run. So, these games that we talked about that are like challenging in the end, that use PvP mechanics but are actually PvE, they have high popularity because they go for this easy to pick up, hard to master type deal. Dark Souls, fucking perfect analogy for this thing. But we can look at it from the opposite side. And this is when I started doing this, and I was like, all right, I may have something really good here. Because my entire critique of Overwatch was that it's not critique. When I did the analysis of Overwatch and why Overwatch 2 is going to be better than Overwatch 1, Overwatch, my complaints about it, well, they were dependent on PvE or extra content. They were not execution based, right? Right now, Overwatch is more decision based. Overwatch 1 is decision over execution. There's very, very little to no deception in Overwatch. That was a critique of mine as well. And there's not really an overwhelming amount of choice, right? It's very simple. There's few choices. The answers are clear. So you're like, oh, we got a PvP game because it's only playable PvP. But what do? Constant PvE mechanics. Of course, this is why the game was so popular. Like, what happened to Overwatch? Extremely popular. Everyone loved it. Everyone get into an FPS game that they could never get into. But because they ignored the PvP rule set, they had a PvP mode, but they didn't use PvP mechanics. We are where we are today. Where extra content pushed out its shelf life a little bit, but everything else is limited and like it has no room for growth, at least longevity wise. Like I was like, oh shit, my critiques of Overwatch with this line up perfect. And I didn't even like try to force them to go together or anything. Like this was completely, when I did this section, I stepped back and I was like, wait a fucking second. I'm like, this is exactly what I said a couple months ago. So that's how you know, or how I know, because it could be untrue, but I believe this to be true, that it's something. When you can use a premise, a hypothesis, against multiple concepts and it works, you have something. You know, Stick says, people tend to replay Dark Souls a lot, even though it's solvable. Because of execution. Right? Execution increases the ceiling. And to put it, there's a lot of stupid stuff you can do into it as well. There's player choice and things like that, but execution's a big deal about it. So execution helps games immensely. But it's not the perfect answer. Or it is a perfect answer for PvE, and you get your use out of it, and you're done. Yeah, so this is just my take on this. I don't know what it does. It gives me some unique insight into some things. It kind of gives me a way to understand how we can approach design in easy to pick up and hard to master, which I've never seen anyone talk about ever. We always talk about it conceptually and like as a philosophy. We're like, oh man, if only this game was easy to pick up and hard to master. But no one knows how to do it. This is actually a way to actually kind of look into that Pandora's box. Yeah, and this is basically what I disagree with Overwatch right here. Its mechanics are inherently PvE, but they stuffed it right into a fucking PvP game. And what happened? Exactly what I predicted. I can't say exactly as I predicted because I didn't understand this concept back then. But a game that shoves the opposite, a PvE into PvP, is going to be extremely popular at first and then heavily taper off as time goes on, as the game gets solved. Yeah, PvE games that with a lot of choice or ability for player expression often see a lot of replayability. Anyways, yeah, the problem is I would consider customization under overwhelming choice. But the thing is, when we're talking overwhelming choice, I mean fucking overwhelming choice. Like hundreds of thousands of ways to do it. Dark Souls doesn't have that. It has some stupid stuff you can do. Like, let's say I'll round up. I'll say there's 100 builds you can do. I still think that's pretty thin design. Especially as soon as you start the best way to explain this would be Path of Exile. Path of Exile, people are like, oh my god, there's so many decisions. This is actually, I hate this. Okay, here we go. So watch this. So this is the Path of Exile skill tree. You start in the middle here. Or you can start in the middle. You can start on one of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I believe 6? Is this correct? Am I doing this right? And then I believe there's an unlockable class that starts in the middle. But essentially all of these are passives that you can use to customize your build. Now everyone's like, oh my god, there's so many choices. Look how crazy this is. There's a billion different builds you can do. But the truth is, it's like plus 15 dex, 8% increased dexterity. Hey, here's, here's the tribute mastery. Yeah, you add some passive stuff. The truth is because this is split up where it's intelligence, agility, strength. The basic 3 shit of everything. Where strength, and each one of these solid is 1 class. So you have 3 classes. And then where each of these merge, you have a class. So where intelligence meets strength is a class. Where intelligence meets agility is a class. Where agility, yada, yada, yada. So you're, I believe it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 classes? And then they had some specialization. So while there is like amazing choice, the truth is you have to go specific builds. You have to do specific things in this because it's not just pick whatever you want. If you ever want to go around the skill tree map, you actually have to put points into this basic shit just to get around. And if you want to do something truly unique, well, you'd have to waste too many of these points to get around to actually do anything. So it's really not... If all of these things were available independent of each other, then yeah, you can do some wacky ass shit, but you can't. So you're like, oh, I'm going the strength path. I go strength, and maybe strength gets a little bit of magic in this circle. Oh, cool. It's just not... This does not give the amount of depth you think it does. So, again, player customization, as soon as you can start siloing it, it really limits it. As compared to Chess or Go, where you're siloing things and it doesn't do shit. People get mad at me when I tell them Path of Exile is just materia from Final Fantasy VII combined with the Sphere Grid from Final Fantasy X. That's it. Yeah. So this is just kind of... It's not about Overwatch. It is about Overwatch. My personal note, I think I greatly enjoyed researching this thing about game design. Yeah. I had a question and a concept, so I started writing about it. I got my ideas out on paper where I could finally correct them. For those of you who don't know, if you think you know something, write it down. You'll realize how fucking dumb you are. It's just how things work. As soon as you write them down, you can correct them. Once corrected, I can use them as a tool against real examples to see if the original idea actually holds water. And this is one of the ones, one of the few times where it not only worked out, but allowed me to see some interesting patterns that I can see use in the future. Right? Like, I took this concept and I applied it to my old concept, and it fucking fit in. That's amazing. Like, completely unintentional. It was a complete fluke that was lines of exactly with my Overwatch design discussion and how mechanics leverage casual design, not competitive. Gives both ideas slightly more credibility seeing they lined up naturally. Yeah, this thing is the big one. The idea that I can say this with pretty good confidence. Before I said it confidently. I don't know if I had the stuff to back it up, but I was like, oh, no. The biggest trick Blizzard ever pulled on Overwatch is that they said that it's a competitive game. It is as competitive a game as you can get like Mario Party. Right? It's just fucking random. They're gonna give a star to some guy that's losing, and then he wins, and it doesn't matter what you did. That's what Overwatch design really is. That's the biggest trick they've ever pulled. And it's because of this. It's because they said, "Hey, here's a PvP game," and then they just used PvE mechanics. They chocked it full of PvE mechanics. So yeah, that's that. I don't know if there are any questions or discussions or stuff. I don't know. Whatever the fuck you guys got.